welcome back. You're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com, yeah. I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida. And the show is named after kind of a philosophy of helping everyone on a path to wellness that I'm trying to be on as well.
You're doing it. You're not trying.
Thank you. And I thought I would talk about a couple of things and kind of break it up a little bit. So today I'd like to talk about some of the types of issues that we address at A Path to Wellness. Maybe get into a little bit of detail about those, and then segue into a kind of a discussion about macronutrients and how they're useful in our bodies and that kind of thing. When I talk about macronutrients, I'm talking about basically carbohydrates, fat, and protein. And also some of the aspects of health aspects of those macronutrients, how they affect our health and their actions and functions in our bodies. So, but to start off with, I'm going to just kind of go over some of the things that we do in the practice and some of the issues that we address. I'll tell you what, it's quite a range. I guess I could do it alphabetically somewhat, like adrenal fatigue. We'll start with A, right? So adrenal fatigue, adrenal weakness. Adrenal issues mean basically having either used up one's ability to respond to stressors. In other words, having been stressed for a long period of time or relatively long period of time, and having become perhaps unable to address the stressors that we have in our lives, or having a really difficult time with it. And a lot of people have certain responses that reflect adrenal fatigue or adrenal weakness. Like, for example, if you're finding yourself not just perspiring when you're exerting yourself, but just all of a sudden at certain, unexpected times, just suddenly breaking out in a sweat, that can be a sign of adrenal fatigue. If your hands and feet are always cold, that can be another sign that your stress has gotten to you, basically. And if you're working in an environment where stress is a big factor, that certainly can wear on you. Or if you are living in a neighborhood that's not safe, it can wear on you as well. And I've had some personal friends live in areas of town that are not the best, and really run into a lot of situations there and be stressed by it. So making changes in environment, there is an environmental cure for that. And, we talk about environmental cures as kind of the, or geographic cure as you move, right? If you don't like where you are and you're too stressed and it's not working out, you move. Yeah, that can be an environmental cure. But, in our daily lives, we can't always solve the problem so easily. And so we have a lot of bears to face in the woods.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you say in our daily lives, we cannot solve the problems so easily.
Yeah.
But we can solve the issues that, okay, so even when we have issues, though, we can learn how to, everybody has
Nobody
issues.
has issues.
But even when we're going through situations in life, we can learn how to de-stress, not be stressed within those moments.
That's
and
a good
I
point.
guess that's where, and that's one of the reasons why I always enjoy listening to your show, and, you know, listening to your teachings and going to your practice, because you do practice mindfulness while you're also working on the mechanics of the body.
Right. That's true.
So, and I'm just saying that because I know, it's been a crazy week. When I go on TV for 2 minutes, I hear all this stuff going on and I turn it off right away. And then, as you all know, we live in a community, and people come and people go, and it's how, and we see all the stresses that everybody else is going through, and we start accumulating all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. We can own that stress somewhat.
Correct. So how can we
take it on?
In order to, I'm just thinking, going a little deeper. So we know that the adrenals get depleted, and I'm actually experiencing that. I can go into a hot sweat all of a sudden. And I was thinking that it was my sugar levels that was creating that. But I've been...
Actually, that can create elevated sugar levels.
Wow. So that's why I'm asking this question. So, and I wanted to see, thinking a little deeper, how I can get to the point where I don't even stimulate that. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's where I'm coming from.
So to become detached and to, separate oneself from things that we can't control. We just come to realize that we can't control certain things, and separate from them, and accept that we can't control certain things, and go on with our lives. And
it's learning how to detach from that. I think most people have a hard time. We are so pre-programmed to go to the catastrophe mode, to go into the fearful mode. We identify with things. So, it just goes on, and it just builds all that. And learning how to detach from that, I think, is where cures need to start.
A lot of them do, yeah.
And because when we're talking about these type of issues of depleting your, adrenal, so that's the reason why I'm alluding to all this. Mm-hmm. Not that you and I have any experience in this on a daily basis.
Well, one of the things I do pretty regularly is discuss this with people. And I talk about, for example, deep breathing. You can, if you're finding yourself caught up in something, you can simply take a moment and do some deep breathing, and maybe even throw in some stretching. You don't have to go to a yoga class. You don't have to, work it out through Gestalt or bang things or all these different things. You can simply take a moment and take a few deep breaths and hold in that oxygen, to throw a stretch into it, and it can help to bring your heart rate down, calm your mind. And then you can also change your focus. You can focus on something other than, what is getting your attention, especially if it's stressful. So you can change your focus. You can just focus on a spot in the room if you want. Like right now, I'm looking up at the corner of the ceiling, and I can focus on that area and just focus on the lines and focus on the things that are around that area and the shadow that's there, and the light and the way the light reflects. And you see, and that's taking me away from a focus on daily life's issues. So we can do that, and we can kind of reprogram ourselves that way. And that can help us with adrenal issues. And there are lots of approaches, but that certainly is one of the areas that is good for assisting us to deal with issues like that. Fight or flight response, I've talked about several times before. And of course, it's kind of a term that's commonly known, but not everybody really understands how that works in the body. And it has a lot to do with adrenal function. It has a lot to do with the communication between the brain and certain parts of the brain, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands, and there's something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, where we look at the functionality of those and their interplay, and that has to do with adrenal response and the fight or flight response. So, you know, our bodies are geared toward a situation we're no longer in, most of us anyway, where we're not wandering around in jungles with the possibility of encountering a bear or a gorilla or a lion, something that's threatening our lives in an instant, and then having to decide whether to basically play dead or to run, you know. So that's the whole fight or flight response. Fight, stay. You can also, you know, stand and fight, you know, that's another possibility. So you can fight, you can play dead, or you can run. But that kind of situation is not in our daily lives, but that's the programming that has been historically and in an evolutionary way. And I don't want to get into a big discussion about evolution, of course, but has been programmed into us. And our genes are actually affected by what we've been talking about. If we are in a stressed condition, we are tending to create what are called polymorphisms, or we make changes. This is epigenetics, you know, we can make changes to our genes through the way we are responding to life's issues. And therefore we can actually switch some triggers that can take us toward disease this way. We can do things that can actually lead to our death in a hastened way if we don't handle things well. So it's not just about the genes you were born with, because genes actually do change in our bodies. There are changes that they're making in response to how we are responding to our lives and how we deal with and cope with our lives and the issues that come up in our lives. And at times it may be very difficult. We have lots of issues come up in our lives in a normal life. And, you know, we have to deal with these as we encounter them. And it can be a challenge to keep in a good state. So, but dealing with adrenal fatigue is partly by helping ourselves in our minds, helping to respond to things, and also understanding priorities is very important. You know, if, for example, one of the disorders that's an anxiety disorder, OCD, that can obviously lead to adrenal issues if one's constantly focused on all the details, and all the details have to be exactly right, and if they're not a certain way, then you know, the world's falling apart, or it's a big catastrophe, or even just it drives somebody crazy if things aren't a certain way. That kind of thing is related to OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. And if you focus so much on those details that you lose the big picture, then there's a problem. So keeping a wider view and understanding things in a broader way can be very helpful in getting through things. And even if somebody's facing an anxiety disorder, it can help to move that individual out of that anxiety disorder. Now, of course, conventionally, people are generally treated with drugs to help subdue those kinds of impulses. You know, and some of them, for these kinds of things like anxiety disorders, some of them would be, for example, drugs like Xanax. but I don't know of anyone that has a Xanax deficiency. So, you know, we're obviously not treating root cause. When we talk about other options like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors or SSRIs, like Prozac, Lexapro, all these different versions, those can address some possibilities in terms of the root cause, but it's not so well defined. It's kind of a gray thing there. We're not so sure that that's actually at the root of those issues. And certainly on an individual basis, they may not be exactly the appropriate thing for that individual. Whereas when I approach something like OCD, using that as an example, I'm approaching it by by treating the individual on a more general level, looking at things like the effects of omegas, omega-3 or EPA and DHA particularly. That's icosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid. EPA and DHA, they're in the fish oil or in the omega-3 source, whichever it may be. There are some vegetarian sources as well. That can be very helpful in improving an individual's, improving just the laydown of myelin sheath, which is the kind of the cover on the cable of our neurons, and so that can be helpful, and it is shown in lots of studies to be of great assistance in improving these kinds of disorders. Certain nutrients and vitamins, minerals can be helpful. For example, one of the B vitamins, inositol, has been shown in studies to be equivalent to the effects, at the right dosage, to the effects of fluvoxamine, Luvox, which is used to treat OCD at times. So there are natural approaches to treating these issues that can be helpful. And then there are herbal approaches as well, not just nutritional. There are many others, really. Homeopathic and herbal can be helpful. Homeopathically, we can provide some of the substances that are involved in the way the brain works, neurotrophic factors that are helpful in disseminating signals in our brains and helping to improve the pathways that are created. And herbally, we can use things like rhodiola, for example, is a good herb to help with adrenal issues and helps with endurance, with dealing with stress. Helps to offset the energy drain that happens when somebody's stressed. A lot of people go to work, they work their day through, they have a very stressful day, they go home, and I hear this all the time, and frankly, I was there decades ago when I worked in a different industry. I was in some very high stress management and engineering work that I did decades ago, and I would work my day through. It was very challenging and very stressful, and then I would go home and that would be it. I'd be burned out. I'd flop on the couch or whatever. I just couldn't do anymore. I was done. I was tapped. And that kind of situation I hear all the time from people. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So it has an energy drain effect, and you can replenish, you can rebuild. We can rebuild. We can do this. So there are a lot of approaches that can be used to improve that situation.
Now, in order for that to happen, though, we have to believe that from our core, don't we? We can rebuild. The same way they say we
Right.
can overcome, we can rebuild. And I say that because I've been told I was diagnosed with certain things and I was told that it's degenerative and I'm not going to do better. but then I have come to you as my doctor, and you tell me you can be healed.
Yes.
And in the last 4 years, you have had to see the progress of where I was 4 years ago with this and where I am right now. There was a time that you may have noticed that much, but I could barely walk. So we can overcome, we can heal.
Yes, our bodies can heal themselves, but we have to help them.
And the brain is a big portion.
Yeah, there's something called neuroplasticity that allows our brains to, rebuild pathways to help to adjust to situations, and we can recover through that. We're not just born with a certain number of neurons, and I've heard this statement before. I've even seen it in textbooks. It's baloney. And it's true with many things like that. There are so many things that are said that are just plain wrong. But we have the ability to rebuild and repair, put simply.
And we have to start by believing it.
Right. So, and then, I was mentioning brain-derived neurotrophic factors. That's a very important aspect too. We can help to rebuild our brains and our neurological systems by addressing neurotrophic factors. And I've spoken, in fact, I think on the last show, I was speaking about neurohormones. Neurohormones are very important as well. And you may not realize, but some of the sex hormones are also neurohormones. For example, progesterone is a neurohormone. It's very important to us neurologically. And some of the precursors are very important neurologically as well. So there are many aspects to repairing these situations. And as you can see, we've only really been talking about one topic so far. That's the A in the alphabet, adrenal fatigue or adrenal weakness. And there are many aspects to treatment in a holistic fashion, meaning a whole person-based fashion that deals with you, mind, body, spirit. So we deal with the physiological as well as the psychological, if you want to put it that way, or the the mind. So and 1B pops in my mind at the moment, and going on to B's, bulimia. Bulimia is an eating disorder and an anxiety disorder. So I've been talking about anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders, including eating disorders, can be assisted and possibly improved by the use of omegas, just like I was talking about OCD. There are so many anxiety disorders that can be helped with simple omega-3. A lot of kids don't get omega-3s, especially in the US, where standard American diet is a burger, a Coke, and some fries, which is a diet totally devoid in nutrition and, maybe with a little bit of some of the nutrients, but it's ridiculous. Hardly any antioxidants, very toxic food, and damaging and inflammatory, very inflammatory food. And so, there can be real problems with that. And there's a lot of problems with just the root of that being inflammatory. So one of the ways that omegas help, particularly omega-3 and omega-9, but not omega-6. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. Omega-3 and omega-9 help to reduce inflammation. And so we can use omegas to not only to improve the laydown of myelin sheath, as I mentioned earlier, and creation of the neurons and the pathways, but also as an anti-inflammatory, help to reduce inflammation. And many of these disorders are inflammatory disorders that we see in modern times. We see a huge number, probably above 90% of the chronic issues are inflammatory, are inflammation-based. So that's quite, quite a lot of disorders that are rooted in inflammation. So we want to work on inflammatory pathways and work in directions that bring down inflammation. So far I've gotten through an A and a B. Okay, I could also do, say, bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder, that's a psychological diagnosis that I see fairly often. And frankly, a lot of these people that are diagnosed bipolar, I find to be very, very aidable, or help. I can help them.
Is there any similarities, or is it very close between bipolar and schizophrenia?
Sometimes they're combined. You'll see combined diagnoses because they're not clear. But when you get to schizophrenia, there are specific aspects like perseveration, which is sort of a tendency to repeat oneself. And even, I know we see that with other disorders too, but that has more to do with memory. When people don't remember that they said something, well, this is different. This is saying the same thing over and over again. It's like a mantra. That's one of the aspects. Also with schizophrenia, there tends to be more of an understanding of things from a negative filter. Positives are hardly even seen, if detected at all. And negatives are what really glare to the schizophrenic. So they tend to be very negative, very focused on the negative. But bipolar disorder is more about, it used to be called manic depressive disorder, manic depression, and it has to do with the two ends of the spectrum. Some people get manic or they get angry, and then at the other end of the spectrum they get depressed, and they can suffer severe depression, and some of them commit suicide because they hit such low levels of depression. So it's very different, but still there are overlaps. Like schizophrenics can experience some of those things too. And schizophrenia overlaps a lot with OCD as well, since I talked about that.
Because I have met some people that come to find out that they say, well, I'm schizophrenic, I have schizophrenia, I'm bipolar, or, and they
exactly
say them both in the same.
Exactly. Very rarely do I see mention of OCD, yet there's a lot of similarity between OCD and schizophrenia.
Now, OCD, is it a compulsion? Does it have to be just with cleaning?
No.
See, when somebody says I'm OCD, it's because they have to have everything in a place or everything in a certain way.
No.
Could you define OCD? I know you're going a little.
So it's not just about cleaning and washing hands and that kind of thing. It also can be very focused on organization, having to have books line up a certain way, or having to have things on a table exactly the right way, or checking the locks 3 times, or checking the stove 5 times, or this kind of thing, and having to be exactly right count in order to do it, or they might have to start over again.
So OCD is a compulsive behavior?
There's a lot of compulsion. Yeah, that's the C in OCD. It's obsessive compulsive disorder. So if somebody is driven to or doing things a certain way. Yeah.
See, wow. And just people are coming to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people with all sorts of issues.
Oh.
So let's just say we'll stop at A and B for right now, and I'll go into what I was sort of segueing into there, was inflammation being such a big issue. And that takes me to the macronutrients, because macronutrients are very important to our bodies. They're essential to our biological function. And what I'm talking about is protein, fat, and carbs. Carbohydrates have kind of a bad name in some ways, because the term carbohydrates is often used to mean starchy carbs, starches. But carbohydrates are not necessarily starches. Starches are one category of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates also include vegetables. and fruit, as well as starches like
Broccoli,
milk.
broccoli and carb.
Broccoli is definitely a carb. Yeah, that's a vegetable. And
Rice.
rice is a starchy carb. Yeah, but it does have some protein in it. Corn, potato, pasta, bread, all of these things, pastries, obviously, donuts. Donuts also have a lot of fat in them, and it's not good fat because they are deep fried in oils that are usually vegetable oils. So that means that they are basically carrying trans fats, which are damaging and toxic and inflammatory and can lead to things like cancer. So if you love your donut, just remember you love it when you get that diagnosis.
Wow, that's harsh.
Yeah. But that should give you a clear idea of why I'm so strict about certain things in terms of the way I do things, and I do them with my kids and so on. And this is, that's the thing. I mean, what you eat is a very large part of what you are creating in your body. You are creating it. It's not that you're genetically predisposed. Genetic predisposition for diseases is very minimal in terms of the influence of it. It's very minimal, like 5% of the reason you get something. It's not a huge factor for most disorders. And so what you eat, you need to choose wisely. So when I talk about carbohydrates, there are starchy carbs and there are other kinds of carbs like cellulose fiber. Cellulose fiber you can find in vegetables very often. And that is a decent kind of fiber. That's a very good, useful, gives you roughage, helps to reduce your cholesterol, these kinds of things. Versus grain fiber that's promoted by the grain industry, of course. And a lot of people, even in the medical industry, buy into this and tell you to have your grain for the fiber, or to have your bran, right? Bran fiber, bran muffins, or bran this or bran that. Bran is great for the grain industry. We love our bran because we make lots of money in the grain industry, right? But it is not nearly as good a fiber as cellulose fiber from vegetables. So if you want to get your fiber, I suggest and recommend fiber from vegetables. Eat some celery. Have some veggies. Have a nice plate of veggies. Get your fiber that way. So carbohydrates have a lot of divisions, and what a carbohydrate is basically at the most fundamental level a saccharide or a polysaccharide, monosaccharide or polysaccharide. Monosaccharide is basically a carbohydrate chain that is then combined. When you have polysaccharides, you combine multiple monosaccharide chains to make a carbohydrate. So we have carbohydrates based on the saccharide chains. This has nothing to do with saccharin. Saccharin is an artificial sweetener, and I know they probably chose that name because it sounds like carbohydrates, just like Splenda chose the name sucralose to hide the fact that they're fake, synthetic, garbage, artificial sweetener. Got to throw garbage in there. That's just the way I look at it. But it's a toxic artificial sweetener that tends to promote or push you toward diabetes by increasing your insulin resistance. Is that a positive thing? No. And then, but they use these fake names, these slightly twisted names that look like the regular thing. Like sucralose looks like sucrose. So when people are reading box ingredients, it looks like it just has sugar in it. But no, it's Splenda. And they don't always tell you that Splenda's in your food. This is something I've been noticing. A lot of foods I'm seeing now have sucralose in the ingredients, but they don't say on the outside or on the front or anywhere else that it has Splenda. They just say sucralose. They don't tell you that it's Splenda, that it's artificial sweetener. So that's something to look out for. And then again, going back to saccharin, a similar little trick they're doing there. Saccharides being carbohydrates, and then they call it saccharin, and it looks like it's just, regular carbohydrate, but it's not. It's an artificial sweetener. And there's been lots of reference to studies in lab animals showing development of cancer when consuming saccharin. And and think about some of these other names, like for aspartame, one of the common brands, at least used to be NutraSweet. I don't know, I haven't seen it around, but maybe it's still around. NutraSweet. NutraSweet sounds so great, right? Nutra is nutritional and it's sweet. Oh, it must be good. Yes. No. It's a neurotoxin. Aspartame overfires your synapses, and there's a lot of indication that it leads to the development of brain tumors. So this is nice, healthy, nutritional, and sweet, NutraSweet. So what you want is real carbohydrates, right? Not the artificial stuff. You want vegetables and fruit, and starches for loading can be good. Like if you're looking at, say, an athlete who's sprinting, or some aspect of endurance that they need some burst of energy. Carb loading can be done, and starchy carbs are useful for that kind of thing. But starches tend to raise the insulin level. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, if you spike your insulin over and over again, it has a damaging effect on your body. It reduces oxygen transfer from your bloodstream into your muscles. So some of the driving of the sugars is into your muscles to energize your muscles. But when you reduce the oxygen transfer, you're actually, your muscles are not in optimal performance, and your body won't be. And it's kind of an asphyxiation, which is not a fun thing. So basically, by reducing the oxygen levels in your tissues, you are creating an inflammatory condition in which aging becomes much more rapid. So a lot of people who are injecting lots of insulin into their bodies are doing this to themselves. And I mean, they're doing it to themselves under the enlightened guidance of our conventional medical system, right? However, there are a lot of diabetics who can be helped, both type 1 and type 2, by the way, that can be helped without insulin, or at least the insulin usage can be minimized under the right guidance. And that would be a preferred approach. And I've done this with many diabetics. So these are other kinds of things that I approach as well. So when we look at the use of carbohydrates, we want to be judicious. We want to use them in a good way, and we want to choose good carbs. Now, vegetable carbs are usually much superior to starchy carbs. The amount of nutrients in vegetable carbs are phenomenally better, from micronutrients to to all of the antioxidants, the minerals. there are many nutrients, and when I talk about micronutrients, for example, iodine. Iodine is far more plentiful in the plant world than in starchy carbs, and where in fact, we used to, in the baking process back in the early 1900s and 1800s, use iodine in the baking process. Iodine was removed somewhere mid 1900s from the baking process in the United States anyway. And in lieu of iodine, bromates and bromides were used in the baking process. Now, the iodine is helpful. It's anti-cancer. It helps to fight cancer. It helps to provide essential nutrients that are converted into our thyroid hormones that are very useful in metabolization, right? So they replaced those with bromates and bromides that actually are antagonistic to thyroid and cause subduing or reduction in thyroid function. So we have this kind of evolution that has made the U.S. society generally deficient in iodine. If people in the U.S. were eating far more vegetables and fruit, and particularly vegetables, there would be an improvement in that. And some of the vegetables may go a little further than most are used to in the U.S., like seaweed, kelp, dulse, various forms of seaweed.
Can you overindulge any of those?
Yes, absolutely, you can, but it would take quite a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I ask that because when I hear iodine,
Yeah.
it kind of makes it sounds a little more intense
Does it?
than, to me, maybe calcium or something like that. So
Right.
iodine doesn't sound normal, because when we used to see iodine as a child, it was in a little bottle and you put it on a groove,
That's
on a
right.
cut, and it's external.
As an antiseptic.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's why when I'm hearing iodine right now, even though I know we have that in our bodies, I never thought of even bringing it in through foods.
Mhm.
Believe
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, if we talk about a comparison, Japanese people, especially the Okinawans, are known for their diet. And part of what's great about their diet is the consumption of foods that contain iodine. The average Japanese woman consumes about 13.5 milligrams of iodine a day. And in the US, the RDA is 150 micrograms. It's a small fraction of the amount of iodine that the average Japanese woman consumes. And when we look at some of the things that are related to that, we look at breast cancer, fibrocystic breasts. There are very few women in Japan that have fibrocystic breasts. In the United States, it's over half the population.
Wow.
So things like that. It's helpful in fighting many forms of cancer, and particularly the female cancers. So all of this comes from eating a plant-based diet. What a concept. And that is the kind of carbohydrates. What's that?
My son is vegan, my younger son, and it's so annoying to me.
It is?
But because it's not, and it is. And I realize, though, what vegans go through, because in all reality, what I could think of as let me just say, it's a very good choice in the sense of eating. It's always the last choice and the most criticized and the least embraced these days.
Well, it's
like
becoming much more embraced now.
Correct. Now in California, on the other hand, it's different.
Yeah.
More awareness.
I've gone through various phases, but when I first became a vegetarian, not a vegan, and I was a young guy, and
You mean yesterday?
There was very little acceptance of it at that time, and I got arguments. I got people telling me off because I wouldn't eat certain kinds of foods, and that's just, sorry, but the term is ignorance. A lack of understanding of why we do these things, and that's part of what I'm trying to convey, right? So let's switch over, say, from carbohydrates, vegetables, good. Starches, useful, but not always, and can be a problem. Can lead toward more problems with glucose metabolism and that kind of thing. But protein, let's talk about protein a little bit. So proteins, we can make choices on proteins. So among the most inflammatory, if not the most inflammatory, proteins is beef. And there are studies, many studies out there right now, current, recent studies, showing that eating an anti-inflammatory diet that does not include beef is much more beneficial to our health than consuming the beef, even with the protein benefits and the iron benefits and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then other forms of proteins like chicken, turkey, pork have similar inflammatory properties, but not quite as high on the inflammation index. When we go down to fish, if we talk about cold water fish, wild caught cold water fish is a very good choice if you really feel that you absolutely need an animal protein. That's a good choice. But you want to then look at mercury content, because fish sometimes have mercury. And the highest mercury content we see is in the game fish. So people who go out sports fishing, like, swordfish, shark, tilefish, all these game fish, and consume those, are getting a high level of mercury. Whereas if we look at fish that are from cold water, generally salmon, pollock, haddock, cod. Haddock especially is very nice in terms of the benefits, the anti-inflammatory benefits, as well as a very low level of mercury content from sampling. I'm talking about from sampling studies that have been done. Tuna tends to have, that tuna is about as high as I think should be consumed on anywhere near a regular basis in terms of mercury content. But it's only like a fifth or less than a fifth of the scale of all of these fish. Salmon, cod, haddock, pollock are very good choices, particularly salmon and haddock. Pollock is about halfway to tuna's level, and cod is somewhere in there as well. So those are good choices as proteins that are anti-inflammatory.
Is there any such thing in good choices of something that's high in salt? For example, I eat codfish, but the codfish, the way I eat it, it's, I guess, reprocessed with a lot of salt on the outside and it's like dried up. And then we boil that, we take out a lot of the sauce, but we use it in a salad. Does the sodium affect the process of what I'm trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. Yeah, the sodium's going to make you swell up. That's inflammatory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you're concentrating liquids. So again, you're swelling. You've got
then when I just realized but stop, generate fats, stop, most of the fats out there. But still a little bit of the around tummy. And still try to stay for a while. Most recently, things changed around here, so I get into all these different we find science are going crazy. It's not my story.
Like I said, the majority of the yeah. So the majority of the issues we're dealing with are inflammatory. So yep. Many of those can be gotten rid of very easily by the way, treating literally. And it's something like I had a lady to me, she's a few months ago. I used to get red marks and white I have been installing Europe here, and I don't have that right now. For example, so yeah, and I use that. I think they're to find something with it, and maybe winner after something, so I'll get with you. Where they can just actually see, and as they're doing anything, doing something, well, they have we all want to see that visual. I've lost out 12 pounds, almost 14%. And then, 2 months. So that really made it stand that because the change made or that big, but it takes a long time to become visual because speaking of visual, for example, I'm treating acne patients, a lot of patients, so I did earlier. Acne patients have treated several usually females with acne problems, serious acne problems, cystic acne, this kind of thing. And virtually gotten rid of it. And quite often it's related. So this is part of the action. And also inflammatory foods can add to that can make part of the problem there. So by having an anti-inflammatory diet that is primarily plant-based diet can be very helpful in most situations. So carbohydrates are good if you get the right carbohydrates, for sure. Proteins, highly plant-based proteins. There are many sources of plant-based proteins. You can get them in terms of shakes and things. Or you get this is fairly decent one. Here, how this is a shake. This is the protein shake. It has 20 grams of protein, 13 grams of carb. That's why I say it's fairly decent. Carbohydrates is a little higher than sleep. But it's not bad. It has some nutrients and minerals and vitamins in as well. So that's something can be used. This is pea protein based. There are many sources of pea protein, rice protein, artichoke protein, hemp protein, and so many forms of base protein. And spirulina is a source of protein too. Spirulina has the most concentrated source, to my understanding, of protein available. So to say you need something not protein is hogwash. You can get lots of protein-based diets. And they're anti-inflammatory. Say that not inflammatory. And overall, so that's anti-inflammatory. And so we look at fats. So to use anti-inflammatory fats, generally speaking, right? the good fats, avocado oil, olive oil, and same category, saturated fats. And we have saturated fats, which used to be a big bugaboo, but there are certain saturated fats that are actually beneficial, particularly coconut oil. So you cook with coconut oil, and it's very beneficial. It's very good for your brain, and it's medium chain triglycerides. It's helpful on many levels, but the other fats that we've seen as substitutes are actually damaging and inflammatory. When I can't believe butter. No, that is inflammatory. Margarine is inflammatory. Okay. Vegetable oils, particularly when cooked, are inflammatory. Canola oil is inflammatory. Like I said, coconut oil is difficult to cook, or even butter. Maybe your other option of vegetable oils. Yeah, because the vegetable oils are polyunsaturated. That means that the molecules have many bonds. And so what happens is by the heat, they basically attach to whatever's in their environment, changing molecular structure, transfiguring molecules, creating trans fat. And they're not natural fat sources.
Right now, I already stressed that.
Well, let's add some other factors. Canola oil typically generally is genetically modified, which is also that's inflammatory typically. So yeah, that's another aspect of all of this. In choosing any of these, if you talk about beef is most beef, not grass-fed, most beef, and who knows what those greatest grass, but putting that aside, we talk about beef being injected with genetically modified growth hormones for starters. We're talking about antibiotics that are injected into the animals, etc. Okay. So there's that issue. If you talk about plant food, corn, soy, genetically modified. Wheat, very common, very common genetically modified, more so. In fact, I just totally avoid wheat now. I just don't need it. And if I do give my kids any wheat, it's non-GMO wheat. You have to look for it. Look for breads that are non-GMO and or organic. If it's organic and it's typically non-GMO, all of them may be small amounts of it. But non-GMO or organic is a good way to go. So all of those substances are typically genetically modified, and some of the other crops like peas can be genetically modified. So for a source, look for non-GMO protein. It has this little label here. Right. So you're maybe safe to see, but this there. See that little label under there? That's non-GMO label. See, it's non-GMO. So that says non-GMO project fire. Okay. So look for those organic, USDA, organic. So I think we've covered the macronutrients pretty much. So what's it today? Thanks for listening to WSPF-DB.com. And if you like a little practice, it's encouraging such as that. telephone number 727-329-667, or take a look at our website, www.apppt.net, short for Path to Wellness. Trying to give you a shorter form there. That's .net, or if you want a long form, Path to Wellness, LLC.com. And if you just punch in, Path to Wellness, we'll probably come up with all this. Either way, any of those ways, look for it. Certainly see YouTube as well of this show. So thanks for listening.